Hi, this is Jeffrey McManus, and this screencast is going to take you through the steps of installing WordPress onto a web server. This is a code lesson course, so we're going to be using the student.codelesson.com servers, and I'm going to start actually at the point where you download WordPress from wordpress.org. Now, as we talk about in the class notes, there's two different major products that WordPress provides. They have a whole bunch of other ones, but there's really two main ways to start blogging using WordPress. There's the software, and then there's the service. We use the software exclusively. We don't use the service in this course. The service is WordPress.com. The service is good if you don't have any technical knowledge and don't want to have total control of your blog, if that doesn't matter to you, if you don't envision doing extensive customizations or anything like that. But the WordPress.org software gives you complete freedom. You can change the software if you need to. You can customize it. You can add on themes and other things, and add on plugins and things like that. Anything that you need to add, you can do it. And so that's going to be sort of the core of what we learn in the Introduction to Web Publishing course, the idea of sort of taking control of your own website and being able to do anything that you want with it. So starting here at the WordPress documentation site, which is codex.wordpress.org, one of the most frequently used pieces of documentation on there is called Installing WordPress. It's obviously the starting point for anyone who wants to run their own WordPress site, and that's where we're going to start with today. I'm not going to go through this documentation. This is linked to in the course introduction, so you can take a look at it at your convenience, but I will mention a couple of the things that are in here, and there are a few differences between the way that we're going to do things and the way that you're going to do things in the course. One of the things that they mention in this download and installation documentation is FTP, File Transfer Protocol. For Code Lesson, we use SFTP exclusively. You probably already saw, hopefully, my other screencast on SFTP, and in that screencast we talked a little bit about the differences between FTP and SFTP, but just to review, SFTP is secure, FTP is not, so that's why we use it. Most web hosts support at least FTP, but the ones that we see and that we work with frequently are moving towards SFTP exclusively. So you want to use SFTP when you can, avoid SFTP. Avoid FTP. You want S because the S stands for secure. And then we have a couple of other things, most of which you won't have to worry about, particularly for this course. You have to have a web server with minimum requirements, and basically we're looking here at all of the elements of the WordPress architecture, like web server, database, current version of the PHP programming language, which is what WordPress was run in. You don't have to worry about any of this for this course because the web server is pre-configured for you, but if you ever want to run a WordPress installation on another web host, another web server, then you will have to make sure that they have the minimum requirements, and you can check the documentation for what those are. They change for every WordPress version as well too. Then you download the latest version of WordPress, unzip the file, put a password in and a secret key, and then you can upload the WordPress implementation into your web host. So the download page, you can see, is right here, very straightforward. It tells you the current version of WordPress. 3.01 is the current version. If you are going to this page and you see that you have a later version of WordPress, that's mostly fine. The installation process actually hasn't really changed that much from one release to the next. They started off real simple. They keep it real simple. There's not a lot of differences from one release to the next, which is really nice. WordPress is also a pretty small download, about 3 megabytes, so you should be able to get it pretty quickly. I went ahead and downloaded it already, and you can see it's on my desktop right here. Now, the process for unzipping this guy is going to be a little different depending on what operating system you're in. I'm obviously on a Mac here, and on the Mac all I have to do is double click and it will unzip into a folder that is conveniently called WordPress. If you're on Windows, you can still double click the zip and it'll pop up into a window and you'll probably have to drag it out. I would recommend, no matter which operating system you're on, to put the WordPress installation into your desktop so that you have it in front of you. You can open it up, you can see the PHP files and so forth that are in there. There's a bunch and stuff. But for the most part, this will be as far as you need to get, and you can then start the process of configuring and putting the WordPress installation files up onto the server, which we'll do next. Okay, so we've downloaded WordPress, we've unzipped it, you can see the files that are in here, and now what we're going to do is take a look at the 5-minute install. Instructions for WordPress. It's pretty straightforward. There's a couple of things in here that we're going to do a little bit differently. The one main thing has to do with the database. Creating the database is something that isn't covered in this course, and for most purposes you're going to have an internet service provider in all likelihood that will do this for you. So they will create the database for you, they will send you a username and password for the database. We've also done the same thing for you if you're using student.codelesson.com, so that's all taken care of for you. We just didn't want to get into too much of the details of setting up the database. It's not hard, but it's just a bunch of extra steps that most people will never have to do. So we've already downloaded and unzipped. We've got a database with a username and all that stuff. So the next step, step 3, is to do our database and other configuration. So the way that they do this is there is a file in here called WP config sample. And the reason why they have you, what they do is they have you rename this so that you can preserve the original, and that makes upgrades easier, and it just, you know, leaves everything in place. You're not deleting a file, you're just copying it. So I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to rename it. The key thing here is that WordPress needs a configuration file called wp-config.php. It can't be named anything else, or WordPress won't be able to find it. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to open this file, and I'm doing all this work on my machine right now, and I'm going to upload this file to my web server machine, but this won't work until it's uploaded to my web server machine, so that's a key thing to bear in mind. The number of configuration changes that you have to make here is really small. All you really have to do is change 3 or 4 things. The first thing is the name of your database. And then you have a username, and that's going to be given to you already. Or if you're using a student.codelesson.com server, you have already should have received a WordPress username and password. I'm just going to put in XXX for now, and I'll put in my real password in a second here. DB-hosts don't change. This gives you the ability to have a database that resides on a different server than your web server machine. For a lot of personal WordPress blogs, the database and the web server reside on the same machine, and when you have 2 things reside on the same machine like that, you can use a shorthand, just say localhost, and that is shorthand in the Unix world for use the thing that's on the current server, whatever that happens to be. So don't have to change that. Character set UTF-8, don't have to change that either. That just means use an international character set, and collation doesn't have to be changed as well too. Now, one other thing that you have to do is to add a salt value, and this has to do with encryption. This is a security thing. It's actually, I don't remember if this is optional or not. It's a relatively recent thing that WordPress makes you do, but basically the idea here is that you have to generate some secret keys that are going to be automatically generated actually by WordPress, and you can see what I did there. I went to the URL that was listed in the documentation in the comments, api.wordpress.org/secretkey/1.1/salt, and this basically generates all of the unique phrases that need to be generated for various encryption-related features of WordPress. Generally, these are things that exist under the hood. We don't really go into these, but they have to do with secure authorization and ensuring that secrets such as passwords are encrypted sufficiently so that it will be very, very difficult, if not impossible, for an attacker to get this stuff out of your WordPress implementation. So all you need to do once you've generated these, and it's different each time. You can actually see if I refresh this salt generator page that WordPress provides, it's totally different each time. These are all randomly generated phrases, is to copy all of these lines. I selected all of them, I copied them, and then I just paste them into my configuration, and you can see all of the encryption gibberish that was generated by WordPress will become a part of my installation, and all of these values will be unique to my installation, and so others won't have the ability to get access to my encrypted stuff. One other thing that I'll mention, although you don't need to make a change to this, is that WordPress, like a lot of PHP applications, gives you the ability to specify a database table prefix. This is very helpful for a lot of internet hosting services that only give you the ability to have a single database. Sometimes you'll want to have a separate database, and most of the time for professional hosting we'll set up a separate database just for WordPress. But if for whatever reason you're stuck with a host that only gives you one database, then what WordPress will do is it will put a prefix in front of the names of each of the database tables that it needs, and the default prefix is WP and then an underscore, so that if you go into your database and you see all of these tables that begin with WP underscore, you'll know that those are WordPress tables. And this just gives you the ability to run a WordPress installation on a machine that you only have one database allowed on. And this actually is the case for the student server for Code Lesson, where we only give students one database each. And so the fact that each WordPress table begins with WP underscore is handy, because you'll be able to put your WordPress tables into the same database as your practice tables that you might have been using for other courses or whatever. So WordPress localized language defaults to English. You can use this to use one of the other international languages that WordPress uses. There's a developer debugging mode in this configuration. Don't need to fool around with that. And then you can see at the bottom they tell you this is where you want to stop editing. These are the last changes that you're likely going to need. And really, you know, for most of these, I went through the whole file, but for the most part, whenever I'm doing WordPress configuration, I go database name, user, password, and do these encryption hashes, which is just, you know, a copy and paste, and then you're done. That's pretty much it. Now, to be able to test this, I'm going to have to put this file up on the server, and that'll be the thing that we do next.